Good evening and welcome back once again to Channel 514 and SPK Plus, and we are continuing our series exploring ancient literature, and at this point I'd say we are about halfway through, or a little more than halfway through, our trip through Egyptian literature. Now, probably there will be 3 or 4 more videos after this on Egyptian literature before we move on into Greek and Roman literature, but this time I thought we would talk about some Egyptian texts that are closely related to, or at least can easily be spoken of in roughly the same context as the wisdom literature that we discussed in our last video. And so what I have in mind are some scribal texts that have to do with the schools of the scribes, which were an important class or division of Egyptian officialdom, and also some autobiographical texts that we have in the forms of inscriptions from tombs, and then also some royal stelae, if we get to that point, and we haven't taken too much time. And if so, if that is the case, I'll cut it off and save the stelae for next time, but in any case, let's get right down to this. Now, I will have some commentary to make about halfway through, or when we get to the stelae and the autobiographies, but first I think I want to get right to these scribal texts, because these are the ones that I think are most easily paired with the wisdom texts that we discussed last time. So, in our source here, The Literature of Ancient Egypt from Yale University Press 2003, chapter or part 8 of the volume is entitled Scribal Traditions. So, the first text in here, and I would say it is without a doubt one of the best known texts from ancient Egypt on the whole. So if you ever take a class on Western civilization or something like that, and before you get to Greece you spend some time on Mesopotamia and Egypt, or if you take a course on the ancient Near East in college or anything like that, you are definitely going to run into this text. And here the title that's given to it is The Satire on the Trades, the Instruction of Dua Kheti. Often it's called the Teaching for Kheti or something like that, but the Instruction for Kheti maybe. But the scene that we're to imagine in this story is that an elder scribe is advising one of his young pupils on not how to be a good scribe, but why it's good to be a scribe, because scribes in Egypt were a privileged section of the population, and their skills were highly valued, and they were even able to strike terror into people who came under their power in some way. So, for example, a scribe might be sent to assess taxes or something like that. And so, not only were they privileged, they also wielded a lot of power. So, in any case, the Satire on the Trades, the reason why it's given that title pretty often is that, again and again, it describes how people in other trades, other than the scribal trade, have a hard life as opposed to the sweet life of the scribe. So you find things like, I do not see a stoneworker on an important errand, or a goldsmith in a place to which he has been sent, but I have seen a coppersmith at his work at the mouth of his furnace. His fingers were like the claws of the crocodile, and he stank more than fish eggs. So there's all this stuff in here about how any other job you have besides being a scribe, not only is it hard and painful and wearisome, but it will do horrible things to you. So that is the satire on the trades, or the teaching for Tjetji. And so we can imagine that probably little Tjetji was convinced that he should grow up to be a scribe after hearing all of this. So also we have a section in here called the Scribal Traditions in the Schools, and what these are short compositions that were given to young scribes to copy, to learn how to write. So they're sort of schoolwork, So you have one here that's given the text, Advice to the Youthful Scribe, from Papyrus Anastasi 5, lines 8, 1 to 9, 1. I'm not sure exactly how all these, what significance all these numbers have, but it's from a papyrus called Anastasi 5, and we have words like this: O scribe, do not be idle, or you shall be curbed straightway. Do not give your heart to pleasures, or you shall fail. And let's see. Some of these are prayers. A prayer to Thoth for skill in writing, Thoth being the scribe's patron god, or the prayer to Ammon in a year of need. Another is on the hardships of the soldier's life. It says, the vertebrae of his back are broken while he drinks foul water. So, that doesn't sound good. You better do your homework, kid. So, let's see. Those are the scribal traditions, and so now I think you can see pretty easily why I wanted to get to those right after the wisdom literature. But also, in this same book here, we have some autobiographies, and they're called autobiographies because, not surprisingly, they're descriptions of the life of the deceased that were inscribed on the walls of tombs. So, in your tomb, if you were someone who led an interesting and significant life, and you could afford to have a tomb and an elaborate burial, you might want to include information or a text on the wall about who you were and what you had done, and people that you had known, and the king under whom you had served, etc. So we have here some autobiographies from the Old Kingdom. So I forgot to mention the satire on the trades, and these other scribal texts. These are from the Middle Kingdom and the New Kingdom. So now we're going back to the Old Kingdom, and we have these autobiographies. The first that's included here, I don't think I'll bother reading excerpts from it, but it is the autobiography of someone named Weni. It doesn't say here what he did, but he will have been a courtier under the reign of Pepi I, and ultimately under the reign of Merenre. He lived to be over 70, but in any case, he calls himself here at the very beginning, in the superscription, so to speak, of his autobiography, the Count and Overseer of the Southland, he who was in the palace, etc., etc. So now, after that, after Weni, we have someone named Harkhuf, and what does it say about him? Harkhuf is a nomarch. A lot of these autobiographies, are those of these people called nomarchs. Now that's something I've never had occasion to mention in our discussions so far, is the position in Egyptian society known as nomarchy. So that's not monarchy, that's nomarchy. So the different districts of Egypt are called by this Greek word nome, N-O-M-E. And so our word nomarch is a word for either a sort of lordling who rules over and administers one of these districts, either independently of the king in a time when the monarchy is weak, or on behalf of the king in a time when the monarchy is strong and has the ascendancy. And so A nomarch is one of these district chieftains in any case. So he's either an official or he's sort of a petty nobleman. And so, in Egyptian literature, one gets the impression also that there was sort of a negative association, at least popularly, there was sort of a negative association with the nomarchs. So they were kind of people that you might be treated unjustly by, and against whom you might have to invoke the justice of the king or something like that. So they kind of have this association with arbitrary, rapacious power that can be cruel and oppressive, but more simply, they were district, local chieftains and officials and local lords. But so anyway, that's more description of that than we really need here. But the nomarchs included a lot of these guys whose autobiographies we have here. We have one named Harkhuf, we have one named Kar, spelled Q-A-R, and let's see, we have one called the Stela of Tjetji, T-J-E-T-J-I, who seems to have been a courtier who lived in the first intermediate period. That's sort of a long autobiography that's more literary, or probably of greater literary quality than some, but I don't think we'll stop to read from it. We have also two more nomarchs from the Middle Kingdom, from the 12th dynasty, Amenemhet and Khnumhotep II, and these tombs were found at Beni Hassan. So, let's see, after that we have the Stela of Iykhernofret, and what this one is about, I believe there's a good description of it in the introduction here. Iykhernofret describes his mission on behalf of King Senwosret III from the court in the north to Abydos, probably in the king's 19th regnal year, on the basis of a stela in Geneva, to refurbish the god's statue, the statues of the associated gods, and the related ritual equipment, and to conduct the major processions carried out as part of the ritual drama at the site. So, this stela is autobiographical in the sense that it relates an adventure that the author, or the person who commissioned it, went on. So it's not from his tomb, it's not describing his whole life, but it's describing how he went on this mission as in order to refurbish a statue of the god Osiris and some other gods associated with Osiris on behalf of the king, and how he then took part in a procession and some ritual activity to honor Osiris. But let's see. Those are our autobiographies, and I don't want to spend too much time on them, so we won't stop and read from any of them. But we then have a section in here, it's section 6 in this book, Royal Stelae. So I think we'll get through these. We haven't spent too much time so far, and then in our next video we'll be talking about some other texts that are closely associated with the monarchy, and some that are more overtly religious texts or ceremonial texts, like the Hymn to the Aten, that come from later times, so from the New Kingdom and following. In any case, for now, in this video, we'll do this section of Royal Stelae, and then we'll be done. But the first of these, and these are some of the more important stelae that are known from Egypt and that have more literary and historical significance, and so that's why they're included in this volume. But some commentary that I want to make here. One reason why I didn't bother with this kind of text when we were discussing the Mesopotamian classics is because, to me, texts like those, like the Prism of Sennacherib, the most famous example, because it's usually treated in some way in courses of biblical study or in Western Civ courses and that kind of thing, but the reason that I didn't spend much time on those or bother with them at all, really, and instead focused on more literary texts is that the royal stelae, so to speak, of Mesopotamia, they tend to be sort of all business. So the king is more likely to talk about how someone offended him and he punished them and overran some town and destroyed it and terrorized some people to remind everyone that he's a very dangerous person. So they don't necessarily always have that much historical or literary interest to them, other than the fact that they record some fact, that they chronicle and memorialize some event that happened. They commemorate something, but well, these Egyptian stelae, they tend to be more interesting, I think, or they tend to have more literary value. Maybe that's just my opinion, but it seems that way to me. But I don't think, with most of these we won't stop and read from them, but I'll describe them pretty quickly, and we'll just make a quick run through here. But if we come across something that seems to be worth stopping and reading, then we will. But the first of these is known as the Semna stela. This is what's known as a boundary stela, so it was put in a border region at the frontier of the kingdom. So this one was found in a Middle Kingdom fortress. It was put on display there in the Second Cataract region in Nubia. So it wasn't actually positioned in Egypt itself, but in Nubia, which was upstream from Egypt on the Nile. And in times when Egypt was more powerful, its dominions usually did extend somewhat into Nubia, if not all the way to the more powerful Nubian cities at that time. So when Egypt was strong, Nubia was a province, and sometimes the only province, or the colonial backyard, if you want to call it that, the imperial backyard of Egypt. But in any case, the Semna stela is from Nubia, and the fortress that it's from was positioned in order to control passage on the Nile, our editor says here, northward to Nubia and Egypt proper. But in any case, it's sort of an exhortation to the troops. So it says things like, "Aggression is bravery, and to retreat is vile. One who is driven back from his border is a real coward, for the Nubian listens only to fall at a word. It is responding to him which makes him retreat, but if one is aggressive against him, he shows his back. Retreating, he tends toward aggression. Indeed, they are not men of worth. They are wretched, broken-hearted." So then it talks about how he carried off their women and brought away their inhabitants, and coming forth to their wells, driving away their cattle, cutting down their grain, and setting fire therein. So it's all about Egypt and its power over Nubia and how to deal with the Nubians, etc. So sort of harsh, very harsh really by our standards today, but that's an example of the royal stela literature. Another of these, known as the Stela of Neferhotep, who lived in Dynasty 13, the 13th dynasty. He's the 22nd king of the 13th dynasty, and it says here he's credited with a reign of 11 years. So in any case, what happens in this one? This one you could say is similar to the Stela, the Iykhernofret Stela, in that it describes a journey or the king's dispatching an official to refashion an image of Osiris. So it has to do with refurbishing the cult of Osiris at the town of Abydos in some way, and how the king dispatched some people to do that. Anyway, the next of these, the next section here, it's called the Kamose texts. Let's see if I can scan this quickly enough that we'll be able to get a good description of it. I see. So it seems to have to do with the struggle against the Hyksos. So it seems to be about the kings of the early New Kingdom and their struggle against these people from Western Asia, the Hyksos, who dominated Egypt, or at least parts of Egypt, during the Second Intermediate Period. So you could say it's sort of it's about this great reconquista, this great reconquest and restoration of Egypt against these interloping foreign peoples who had overrun and taken over parts of the country, or had gained undue influence over it. Now, after that, we have a very literary stela, the Poetical Stela of Thutmose III, and Thutmose III, the great empire builder, it calls him here, the greatest empire builder of Egypt's history, having conquered from the Sudan as far as Mesopotamia. So he's a king of the 18th dynasty. And this stela, it says, it's black granite, and it was erected in the temple of Amun-Re at Karnak to celebrate the numerous conquests of Thutmose. So here's a quick reading from there. I have come to empower you to crush the Libyans. The islands of Utgentu belong to the strength of your might. I shall cause them to know your majesty as a hostile lion, and you will render them carrion throughout their valleys. Backing up a little, I have come to empower you to crush the heathen. The lands of Mitanni tremble through dread of you. I shall cause them to know your majesty as a crocodile, the dread one of the river, whom none dare approach. So, moving on, the Israel Stela. Now, this one is significant. I'll say, first of all, what it's about is some of the victories of Merenptah, another New Kingdom king. But the reason that it's pretty famous is that it's the earliest mention in Egyptian literature, or any literature, of Israel, of the people Israel. So outside of the Bible, this is the first place where you see the name Israel. And because the king has attacked and ransacked some places in the Levant, he says at one point in some poetical stanzas at the end of the stela, he has it say, Israel is laid waste, his seed is no longer. Kor, the Levant or Syria, is become a widow because of Egypt. All lands combined, they are at peace. So it's celebrating victories over various peoples in the Levant, including Israel. So, the Israel Stela. Now, the next of these is called the Bentresh Stela, and actually, I already discussed this one, having forgotten that name for it, in our video where we were telling stories about the gods. So this is the story that I remembered as, or under the title, The Princess of Bakhtan, and I don't remember the title that E.A. Wallace Budge gives to it, but it's about a royal lady in the Levant who is possessed by an evil spirit, and an image of the god Khons is able to banish the spirit. So this stela was in a temple of Khons. So that is the Bentresh Stela. Now the next one of these, another pretty interesting one, the Victory Stela of Piye. Now this is historically a very significant one, because it has to do with the conquest of Egypt and the victories over Egypt, and I believe over the Assyrians also. Although I really should have looked this up and had some dates and things like that prepared before starting this. But Piye was a king of Napata. So Napata at that time was a powerful Nubian city. So when you think of the Kingdom of Kush or something like that, the Napatan kingdom is an example of something you could call more broadly the Kingdom of Kush. So a Nubian kingdom that was at its height at this time. And this king, Piye, he was actually able to conquer Egypt, which I believe before this had been under another foreign ruler or under a weak dynasty. Again, I really should have gotten this straight before starting this video, but after that, he and his descendants ruled as what is known as the 25th dynasty, and eventually they were defeated by the Assyrians, and they retreated home to their own kingdom in Nubia, the Napatan kingdom. But the 25th dynasty, they're sometimes called the Black Pharaohs because they were Nubian. So Piye in his victory stela describes his conquest of Egypt. So that's a pretty historically significant stela. It has to do with the ascent or the accession to power of a new dynasty. So let's see. And after that is the Famine stela, and we also discussed that one in our video where we recounted some texts that tell stories about the gods. And so the Famine stela, if you remember, is the one where they have a 7 years famine and they restore the cult of the god Khnum at Elephantine in the south, where the Nile enters the historical boundaries of Egypt. And so Khnum gives them a good flood and ends the famine. And this stela was on display at his temple during the Ptolemaic period, probably to help that temple assert its rights and its claims to exactions and contributions from the local people or from visitors in competition with another temple, I believe the Temple of Isis at Philae, which was a major cult center at that time and was in the same area. So that is the Famine stela. And although, of course, as I mentioned last time, it itself was inscribed in the Ptolemaic period, it's telling a story from much, much earlier, from over 2,000 years earlier, from the reign of Djoser or Zoser in the 3rd dynasty. So that is the Famine stela. So hopefully that, there's one more actually. The Satrap stela, and Satrap, that is a word that you find in ancient history to describe the provincial governors in what's often called the Persian Empire. I myself don't say Persian Empire, I say Achaemenian Kingdom to distinguish that kingdom from the later Sasanian kingdom, which is also known as the Persian Empire. And because I don't like the word empire in ancient history unless it has the word Roman in front of it. And there are reasons for that really, but it's not worth getting into here. But in any case, satraps were the provincial governors under the Persian Empire or the Achaemenian Kingdom. And so the provinces, the satrapies, they were ruled by these satraps at the time of the conquests of Alexander the Great. And of course, early in his campaigns, after conquering Anatolia and the Levant, and of course Greece before that, Alexander the Great went into Egypt, went to the oasis at Siwa, and received a prophecy that he was a god, or he was the son of Amun, but I believe it was Amun, that he was the son of a powerful god, of the supreme god. And so he then, at this time, he marked out the site, the future site of the great city of Alexandria in Egypt. And after that he founded many other cities and called them Alexandria or something else in different lands that he conquered. But after his time in Egypt, of course, Alexander and his armies went on through the Persian kingdom, of course, through Mesopotamia and Iran and Central Asia, etc. But now, the satrap of Egypt let's see, I'm sorry, I just need 1 or 2 seconds here. I see. So, let's read a little bit of the introduction here. So our satrap in this story, in this stela, the namesake, you could say, of the stela, it's probably Ptolemy, the son of Lagos, so one of Alexander's generals, one of his close associates, who later, after Alexander's death, broke ties, severed all ties with his companions, the other generals who had fought under Alexander, and claimed Egypt as his own kingdom, and had himself crowned as pharaoh. And he founded the last of these dynasties, which would rule until Cleopatra VII, the famous Cleopatra of Antony and Cleopatra fame, who of course died in 30 BC. So this dynasty, I believe it was the 31st or the 32nd, but they're usually called the Ptolemaic dynasty or the Ptolemies. So what our introduction here says is, in November 311 BC, while Egypt was officially ruled by Alexander the Great's infant son, Alexander II of Egypt, or the Fourth of Macedon, real authority was exercised by the satrap Ptolemy I, former general and founder of the Ptolemaic dynasty that would rule until the suicide of Cleopatra the Great. And after some victories, in which he extended his control into the Levant, into Syria-Palestine, the ambitious satrap celebrated a Thanksgiving festival that culminated in a royal donation decree to the native gods of Piye and Dep, precincts of the sacred city of Buto. The text of this donation, known as the Satrap Stela, maintains the fiction of Alexander's kingship, while according Ptolemy unprecedented praise, even adapting the narrative Königsnovella format. The text preserves the most extensive information concerning the brief reign of Khababash between the Persian occupations, and typifies late ideology of kingship, with dire consequences for rulers who abandon divine law. So, what it describes is how Ptolemy I, Ptolemy the son of Lagos, made a donation to the cults of some of the local gods of the district of Buto. And so, that is the Satrap Stela. So that's the last of these in our book here, and it makes sense that it would be the last because it's so late. It's from 311 BC, from the time of the very last dynasty of kings. So that pretty much does it for this video. Now in the next one, I think what we're going to do, and I'm glad to have gotten through so much in this one because there are some others that I would really like to get onto. In these next ones, we'll talk about some of these later religious texts, like the Hymn to the Aten, a section called Penitential Hymns, some songs written in honor of Senwosret III, a Middle Kingdom pharaoh, and probably after that, we'll do one on lyric poetry. So that should be a really fun one. And after that, we'll do some more stories, some more nice, fun narrative texts from later times, from the late period or the New Kingdom, and even later from the Ptolemaic period, some texts that are written in the Demotic language, this simplified writing system. And those are sort of romantic or fantastic stories that might remind you of the Arabian Nights or something like that, but in any case, we're getting into some really interesting stuff now. So thanks for watching and joining us for this, and don't miss these next few because it's going to be good, probably more entertaining than the stelae, but thanks again anyway, and have a great evening and a great week, and I'll be seeing you soon, so have a good one.